retired fire chief. I live here in Lebanon, and I'm going to give you a tour of my fire, police, and military museum here this morning. Start out with one of my main interests is collecting of fire and police alarm equipment, and I have what amounts to a working street fire alarm system here. It's all set up, works properly, the boxes ring, the bells ring, the lights flashes, and the technology of the fire alarm system was developed in the United States in 1852, and the first system was put in Boston and sent the first fire alarm in that year. And the technology, although it's changed quite a bit over the years, the same circuitry, the reliability of it, has lasted down through the years. And it's a closed DC supervised circuit, and it is still today the fastest and most reliable way to call the fire department. And as an illustration, I'll pull an alarm box. Now these boxes can be activated by a person on the street, but the real ones that are really of value today are the master boxes, which can be operated from a private alarm system in a school, a factory, a church, or what have you. And so if you picture I'm out on the street going to pull or activate the alarm, this tape and the bells are in the fire station, and you'll see how fast the signal comes in. You'll notice we're getting alarm number 413. Now that comes in 4 times. You see the 413. And that is a signal that an alarm has been received from that box. And they look up, or today the computers come up with the address, and they're off. Nothing is faster, nothing is more reliable. But unfortunately, the communities have let the systems go, and most of the systems in the United States, except for here in the Northeast, have been done away with. They just don't want to spend the money, I guess. In addition to the straight telegraph boxes, they came out with a combination telegraph and a telephone. So you could talk to the dispatcher or pull the alarm, or both. Some of these were set up so the phone was locked and only accessible to the police, and others were accessible to the public. Then around in the 1950s, the telephone company, they decided to get into the act, so the Bell Telephone Company came out with a rented system which used a box like this, which had a telephone in it, and they had all types of things. This one has a button in it, so that if a police officer wanted to use it, he held the button down, picked up the phone, and it would bypass the fireboard and go right into the police switchboard. They didn't last too long because they were too expensive, and the telephone company didn't perform proper maintenance on them. We have some of these boxes were made specially for the cities, such as Chicago, New York City had all boxes made especially under their specifications, and they were different from the normal boxes that other places would have. You'll notice that this box here has the number cast right into the door. It's very obvious that they couldn't change the numbers of these boxes too often. This happened to be from a schoolhouse in the Bronx in New York City. A lot of them had tags, like in the schoolhouses in New York City, the boxes were locked. The principal in his office would have the tag, and here's a tag from Public School 57 in New York City. The street boxes were called spade handle boxes. Spade handle guarded and spade handle unguarded. They both did the same thing. The guard was probably just to help prevent false alarms. Also, these boxes, as some others, had a very loud alarm bell in the box itself, that when you activated the box, it called the attention of anybody on the street to the fact the box was pulled. You want to try that?
Sure.
the box. You'll notice the current meter is fluctuating with the signal. Today, most boxes have to be wound after activation. So when they get through with the fire, they rewind and reset the box, or as they say on the radio, iron out of the box. All boxes have a telegraph key in them to send signals back to the dispatcher. These were used in the days before radio to send for additional assistance, to call for a second or third alarm or special apparatus. Today they use more for testing and so forth. Another thing that we have are the police alarms. Now most people don't know about the police systems because they're practically all gone. About the only one I know that still is in existence is in Brookline, Massachusetts, where they still have a street police system accessible to the public. Most of the police systems were strictly for the control of the police officers on the streets. And from what I've heard of the cops, they did not like them because they had to go to the box every so many minutes and operate the box, which sent a signal into the dispatcher. This is how they kept track of the cops before radio. The cop could also talk to the station on the telephone internally, and he could call for assistance by an emergency signal if he so desired. They could also call the police officer by means of the telephone in the box or a recall system which sounded a bell or horn in the daytime or flashed a red light at night. This would bring the cop's attention to the fact that they wanted him, and he would go to the nearest box and call in. This is one of the older boxes here, and the police officer would go to the box on his rounds at the appointed time, and he would pull the box, and they would send in one round to the station. Which would be punched on a tape and also sounded on a buzzer. If there was no need for the officer, they would do nothing, and in 30, 40 seconds or a minute, he would leave the box and go on about his business. If they wanted him after his duty pull, they would immediately sound a noise in the box which would tell the cop to pick up the phone and talk to the station. He could at any time go to this box and call the station simply by opening the box and lifting the phone. Also, if he had need for assistance in an emergency, he could take his key and insert it here, and it would send a special signal, a long dash, preceding the box number, which in this case is 44. That sounded a special bell on the police officers, on the police department's signal desk. Now that bell would stay ringing until the desk sergeant canceled it. The later boxes came out with a citizen's pull, where the citizen could pull the alarm. This is the type of box that's still in Brookline, Mass. And it also internally had the same features, so the officer could take and send in his one-round duty call and use the phone and so forth in the same manner as the older boxes. In the large cities, the boxes were somewhat bigger and would have a dial or pointer inside. So when the officer would go there, he would select the signal that he wanted to send, which would be a preliminary signal to the box number. The wagon call, or the left-hand quadrant signal, was always the emergency signal. And no matter what setting the officer wanted, when he was done, the pointer would always go back to the emergency signal, so that he could either open the box and pull it immediately and get help, or in some of them had the key situation like the prior box. In this particular case, if I was a Route 3 man tonight, when I did my duty pull, I would set it on the 3 and pull the box. I would get 3 taps preceding the box number. And this box number is 471. So you're going to get 3 and then 471. And then you would return it, and if they didn't want him on the phone, close the box and go on about his business. These boxes were also made so that they could be operated like in a bank or something along that line. They could be operated from a remote location, such as the teller's window. The box would be in the back room. The teller would have a button, or in some cases a foot rail, and they would be able to rest their feet on the foot rail like a bar rail during the regular business hours. But if they needed to send an alarm, they would put their foot under the rail and lift the rail. Also, they had buttons with 2 push buttons, so they had to push them both together to get the alarm, and so forth and so on. And these boxes, if you pushed the button, you would get the same signal, only it would always be preceded by the emergency alarm. And that's box 51, preceded by the emergency alarm. In the old days, when the alarm boxes were first put out on the street, they were always locked. And if you had a fire, you had to find somebody that had a key. Now, those keys were generally kept in stores and places near the box or in private residences. And often there was a sign over the box telling you where the keys were located. Again, it was a very time-consuming affair. But this is a key container that was in a residence on Beacon Hill in Boston. And this was either in a residence or a store or something. It was the key to box 32. And you had to go into the store or go into wherever it was. You would break the glass, take the key out, and then open the box and transmit the alarm. They had a very unique thing in that they had what they called a trap lock. So the keys were numbered. When you put the key into the box, you opened the box, transmitted the alarm. You couldn't get the key out. The key was locked in the lock. The only person who could get it out would be the chief coming along with the release key, and he would release the key, look at the number, and return it to its owner. What's next?
Tell me about the deluge gun.
Okay, this gun was made by the Samuel Eastman Company in Concord, New Hampshire. When I first got out of the Air Force in 1955, I worked for them as a factory rep for a couple of years. And I always wanted one of these, and I finally got one from a very dear friend of mine. And this is a complete Eastman gun as would have been built during the 70s. It wasn't too different from those that they had started building back in the 30s, only a little more sophisticated and better control. These guns were made out of aluminum and brass. They were very, very heavy, but they had probably the lowest friction loss of any heavy stream device on the market. And a gun like this could handle easily 1,500 gallons a minute. A 1,500 gallon a minute is a pretty powerful stream. Normally you wouldn't use anything that heavy, but 700, 800, maybe 1,000 gallons a minute was very, very easily obtainable through a device like this. In contrast to it, the little baby there behind it was built by Akron, and it was a single inlet gun. It was so small that any sizable stream would create too much friction loss. And after the NFPA tests on this type of equipment in the 50s, Akron took this off the market. Okay, this is a traffic wand, I suppose you might call it, from Germany. And the police and the fire in Germany both use these. The red light, of course, is for night use. And in the daytime, of course, you can see it says Halt Feuerwehr, which is the word for fire department or fireman in Germany. And unlike most American collectors, I like to collect foreign fire items. I've been to Europe several times. I've developed a lot of friends in the fire service over there. And so I have some helmets from different places. This particular one is from Vienna, Austria. The yellow one over here is from Innsbruck, Austria. You notice the very strange design of the Austrian helmets. They call this top thing a spider. This one here with the goggles is from the Kern County Fire Department in California, and where they use the goggles in place of eye shield out there because of the wildland fires. Some of the helmets up here, this particular one is from Oslo, Norway. This one here, which is nothing more than an industrial hard hat, is from a little volunteer fire company up in the Scottish Highlands. And my wife and I visited there, and they were very, very wonderful people there, and they gave me this helmet to bring back for my collection. This one here I picked up when my wife and I visited Amsterdam in Holland, and this is a very unusual one. This is the Gallet helmet that was developed in France, and it has a lot of interesting features. One of the features is that this can be equipped with a radio, and you can have a radio in it. You have a small eye shield underneath which comes down to protect your eyes, and you have a larger heat shield with gold reflective. You can see out, but you can't see in. This was something that we used in this country for many years in the aircraft crash firefighting in the asbestos suits. The hoods had a window in it with a gold reflective paint which would help reflect the heat. But this is the latest thing that's sweeping Europe. Hasn't caught on too much in the United States, although there are some departments that do use them. This is from Japan, and I corresponded with a fire officer in Kyoto, Japan, and we exchanged helmets and hats. These hydrants are very unusual for the East Coast. This one here, the white one, and the yellow one over there are what is called a wet barrel hydrant, which you don't see on the East Coast. They are popular in the West Coast and southern areas where there's no freezing temperatures. The water is up in the barrel of the hydrant at all times, and each of the outlets has an individually controlled valve. So you can be pumping from one outlet and connect up to another outlet and without the water coming all over the place. The interesting thing is this is a very old hydrant from San Francisco. The ball on the top was to hitch the horses. The yellow one over there is a very modern version of the same thing as the white hydrant from San Francisco. The two in the middle are very unusual. They're called flush hydrants. This is an old New England mill city idea. The hydrants were carried on the apparatus, and there were designated manholes in the street. And when you would respond, you would have to find the manhole, lift the cover, pick the hydrant off of the apparatus, screw them onto the manhole, and the central control actually turned on the water, and each individual outlet had its own independent gate valve. To my knowledge, they're all gone now. The last place to use them was the city of Boston. And in Boston, these were a supplement to the regular domestic post hydrants. And also, of course, Boston had the separate high pressure system. These were not on the high pressure. These were on the domestic water system. Over here, we have a, kind of hard to see with the snowblower, but we have a hydrant from Germany. And a lot of the European countries, England, Germany, and so forth, they carry the hydrants on the apparatus, and they went through the same thing. Find the manhole, screw the hydrant on, and then operate. An interesting side light to this is, can you turn over here, Fran? In Germany, these signs would be found on the wall of a building. This says H for hydrant, 100-meter pipe. Now that's about a 4-inch pipe. And from this T, the hydrant manhole was 2.3 meters in that direction and 0.5 meters out from the sign. This would help them to find the hydrant if they didn't know where it was. Also in England they had a similar type thing, a 9-inch pipe 12 feet from the sign. Very unusual for this country. This is a pump can from Germany. This type of extinguisher uses plain water and is carried on most of the fire engines in Germany. And as you can see, the hose is somewhat different from what we use in this country. And it's a small, about a 1-inch hose. It has the Stort's universal couplings and a detachable nozzle. It's amazing this will develop quite a stream of water, but before you use it, you have to take the hose out and stretch it out so that it doesn't kink. They also use the kind over there that has the same rigid rubber hose that we would use. But when I was traveling around, I saw more of these than I did the other type. These were some of the different extinguishers that were carried on the apparatus. The foam and the soda and acid extinguishers that were carried on apparatus were not the same as those found in buildings. You'll notice this particular one has a shut-off nozzle. Well, you couldn't get an underwriter's label with a shut-off nozzle. So these were made to withstand a much higher pressure than the extinguishers you would find in the building. These were all operated by tipping them upside down and operating the hose. There's all just some various kinds. Maxim, Seagrave foam extinguisher, and this was a Knight and Thomas, which was a very popular extinguisher for apparatus in the Boston area. They were also set up inside so-called no-spill, so that the acid and stuff bouncing along the road wouldn't spill out into the rest of the extinguisher and set it off. Very interesting. This is an old post indicator valve controlling a sprinkler system. And this came from the Benicia, California Army Depot, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. And a friend of mine bought it. It's very similar to today's post indicator valves, and but it's quite old. And I guess that's about it. Some of the helmets here, the helmet on the far left, the silver chrome-plated helmet, is from the Paris Fire Brigade in France. Excuse me. It's essentially the French Adrian-style military helmet, doctored up for the fire service. These have been pretty much replaced by the Gallet helmet that we saw in the other room. The next one was a Cairns leather helmet that was my helmet when I was the deputy chief in Lebanon. The next one we have a hat, a senior officer's hat from Canada. Notice the very ornate colors and the little tassel on the top, which I always kind of enjoyed. This one is from Belgium. It's a senior officer's hat from the Belgian Fire Service. This is an old Cairns leather helmet from the Fire Salvage Corps. That's the Fire Insurance Salvage Corps from Brooklyn, New York, when Brooklyn was a separate city. This is a woman firefighter's hat from England. This was given to me by the head controller in the fire alarm office in Liverpool. The next is a Spanish helmet from Lisbon, Spain, an old leather helmet from Austria, and this is, of course, a modern police officer's hat. This one happens to be from Hanover, New Hampshire. Some of the badges I have probably, I don't know, many badges, but the top row here are all from foreign countries. Japan, Germany, England, France, Australia. I've got one in here from Singapore, and all over the world. The bottom two rows are all American badges from different cities and towns. I like to collect badges that are from a specific place or have a very unusual shape. Some badges are very plain, I call them a stock badge. Others are very unique, they're custom badges made specifically for a given agency, and so forth and so on. The framed set of badges up there is a presentation set from the Montreal Fire Department in Canada, and it has a sampling of all of the different ranks in that fire department. That spanner wrench was the wrench that was issued to an auxiliary fireman by the name of Edward James Storer of the London Fire Brigade. And this gentleman was a part of a fire party that during the early stages of the Blitz in September 1940 was operating at a fire in the Royal Arsenal at Woolwich, which is a lower part of London. And he and his crew were awarded the George Medal for heroic action at this fire. And essentially what that action was is they, standing on top of vaults of nitroglycerin, kept the fire from extending into a very important group of buildings in the arsenal. And they were ordered to leave and refused to leave their post, and as a result they were able to save these buildings. And I was given this spanner by the curator of the London Fire Brigade, who has since retired, and it was given to him by Mr. Storer when the curator first joined the London Fire Brigade many years ago. And I was able to do some historical research and find out all of the information about this incident. This helmet is one of my prized possessions. It was the helmet of Chief John V. Stapleton of the Boston Fire Department. Chief Stapleton was the father of the Commissioner Stapleton, who was just retired a short time ago from the Boston Fire Department, who was a very prolific author and has written several books. And this is the old Cairns High Eagle type. It also is a helmet that has 16 combs instead of the traditional 4. And this was the sign in Boston of a very senior officer, usually a deputy chief or higher. These helmets were specially made. I don't believe anything like this is available today, but it's still in good shape for something this old, and the shield was hand-painted in the shops of the Boston Fire Department, as were all of the chief shields years ago. And this is something which has been lost in time. This extinguisher is from England. It's a soda and acid extinguisher built by the Minimax company, which is a very famous international extinguisher company. My daughter brought this back from England in a duffel bag for me many years ago. She was over there going to a school. And the extinguisher would be operated by banging it on the floor, which would break a bottle of acid and start the reaction, and the extinguisher would be directed through the nozzle this way. Or it could be set on the floor and you could bail out and leave the extinguisher going. And it's quite a unique piece of equipment. And the thing I like is the label is practically intact on it, so you can see where it was made and so forth. A dummy with a British outfit on. The tunic is the typical British wool tunic which was used. This particular one is from World War II, the National Fire Service. And these tunics were used up until a few years ago. And they were a very heavy wool garment. And actually, I guess they work pretty good. The helmet is made of pressed cork, And again, they were made under much more rigid standards than the American helmets were in their time. The light is a personal light of a senior officer of the London Fire Brigade. The little horn here is the way they would signal. They would signal at a fire to either locate the person or whatever other signals needed. This is a stirrup pump, which was a wartime expedient. This would have been put in a bucket of water, the hose extended, and you could pump. These were put out by the millions during the war for air raids, for the incendiary bombs. Other things is all of the British firefighters at one time carried a personal axe. Unfortunately, today they don't have them issued anymore. There are some available,